I'm Justin Moretto.
And I'm Thomas Torrey.
And this is Two Friends with a Podcast.
Episode 13, The Baker's Dozen.
Welcome.
Hit the drums.
Cue the music.
I'm a filmmaker.
I'm a scientist.
And we're two friends who've made movies together.
And launched a company together.
And we lost our money.
And our identity.
But we are finding ourselves again.
And this is our podcast.
This is it.
Welcome. In today's episode, we catch up on a few movies we've both seen recently.
Bo Burnham's comedy special Inside and the alien thriller sequel A Quiet Place Part 2.
We talked for so damn long, we didn't even get to our main topic.
And there's definitely spoilers ahead, so be warned. Plus, after that, Justin tells me the one outdoor sporting activity that he's always hated his entire life.
New year, new me, baby.
The year's half over, Justin. Okay, we're literally the furthest part away from a year being new.
But first, right now, we get our identity chatter fix with a thoughtful discussion on the tolls we pay to travel this road called life.
All that and more on episode 13.
Life is a highway, I wanna ride it all night long. I got my change for those tolls are coming, I'm gonna pay them all night long.
All night long. Yay, yay! I was on set last week just doing some freelance work with some good friends who have a production company. It was a commercial, and I filled a role that I don't normally fill, which is assistant directing. I was the first AD on a shoot, but that's sort of one of the set things that I can do, and I've done plenty just by nature of when you make your own stuff.
I've done it once. It was actually really fun.
Yeah, you end up kind of ADing your own work when it's small, and my own skill set and personality lends itself to this sort of thing on set. So in a pinch, they needed someone, and I did it, and it was fun. And I'm such an extrovert. I also feed off of community, but I also really respond to serving other people's vision. Like I've got my own projects, my own vision, but I also do well being given a task and really rising to it. And one of the things I really had to learn, and this was something we talked about years ago, was just when I left a company and we started Bad Theology, the loneliness that I felt, where it was either just us or whether it was just me, even the years after, and basically being a freelancer, feeling a loneliness just because I miss being part of a group. Mm-hmm. And was even talking to Shay, my friend Shay, about this, who's a guy who does a lot of work and he's also pursuing passion projects. And somebody said, pursuing a passion project comes with a great burden. It is really hard to just make any project, but if it's a passion project, it's saddled with all this extra burden, and it can be so much easier to just do a project for someone else. And I really related to that and respond to that. I mean, he's a guy who makes a lot of short films. Like he would work at a company and serve the company and then make these passion project short films on the side. And so he's always doing company work to make ends meet and also doing passion projects. And we were just talking about the burden of doing a passion project and the freedom when you don't have a passion project, you're doing another project. Like Fair was so freeing, and it came in so quick because it was never a passion project. It was like Premise was the passion project that we were trying to make. And Fair was like, all right, let's just go make a prototype. And it just came together, and it was the sum was greater than the parts because maybe the bar was low, the expectation was low, but it was so fun. And when I wrote The Cliff Walk, that was a screenplay that I wrote that I was paid to write on existing IP for somebody else. And it was the most stress-free, beautiful sort of 4 months of just a project. It was just awesome. Versus the passion projects, which just you carry all the time. You're always trying to push them up. And because they generate with you, you're always having to convince people of it, cast the vision for it, and then try to make it. And it's just a very heavy burden. And maybe the burden will always be there. Maybe the great directors who are able to make their passion projects, they still carry that burden, even though they have opportunity or they have people lining up to sort of finance them. But it was really interesting, and it'd be something interesting to dig into, sort of the passion project versus the work for hire, essentially, and how I find a great sense of purpose from both, but the work for hire doesn't come saddled with all this extra burden that just can kill you. And I was, Amanda gave me The Artist's Way for Father's Day. It's a really well-known book. Some little thing I read this morning kind of jumped out at me. because, she's in the introduction, she talks about all the people this book has helped. And a lot of them are artists who are blocked. It's mostly for blocked artists, but also people who've pursued a different career and later in their life, they want to do the dream. And so a lot of people later than life, or other people, which I think she was quoting one, it was like the years of bitterness and rejection have taken their toll. And something about that, the word toll, really jumped out at me. And I'm and I've been processing it like, in the same way you get on a highway, you pay a toll to drive that path. I was like, this life has tolls that you have to pay. And we all pay tolls for the paths we pursue. In the life of an artist, they are expensive tolls. And it's like, I am in the middle of like, I feel the tolls being paid now. It's like I'm in this period of hard difficulty. And it's like, I can feel the tolls being paid. And I was like, so what's the key? It's like, the key is like, you don't want to keep paying them until you are fully depleted, right? And go broke. And there's hope that
and not just financially broke.
Well, and I didn't mean financially broke. I meant,
right.
Creatively
and emotionally and psychologically.
And so I was just thinking of that as just like, and I actually got some encouragement from it. It's like, I'm paying tolls for these things that I'm pursuing, and the key is to not go broke, emotionally, creatively, but also maybe to, be repaid for these things later in life, or to buy them back, or, the alternative being, oh, you make it, but you're still just cynical and resentful and bitter because of all the tolls you've paid. They've taken their toll. This life takes its toll.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just still thinking about that. And it's hard. There's a lot of things you look back and you realize, oh, that took its toll. I didn't even see it, but now I have some residual trauma or residual stuff that I got to work through. It was encouraging to read, and it sort of encouraged me to keep reading, because I can sense maybe some of there's an answer to sort of this idea in the book.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because you can extend the metaphor quite a bit, of like everybody has their own highway, right? And
Mm-hmm.
some people are on highways where they will have fewer tolls. Some people will have tolls that are too expensive. They cannot afford to pay. And so they're required to exit, right?
Yeah.
And so they never make it to their destination. And, we've had this conversation before about like, sometimes it's just who can, it's attrition, right? Who can get there, like just outlast the tolls, I guess, in this, and to make it to that destination. And, knowing like when is the time to take the exit. And when I say exit, I don't mean like, give up. So like sometimes it's like, oh, this is my exit. This is my ramp where I take, to my destination.
Or my rest stop.
Yeah, or my rest stop. But like, understanding that, I don't know, it's like getting to that next thing where it's like, all right, well, I'm going to get off of the highway and get onto the, the country road now, which doesn't have tolls. It's a little slower. But, I feel like you can really kind of draw the metaphor out quite a bit. And, it does make it tough, because it's one of those things that like, there's that risk that like, I just can't pay these tolls anymore. You see a toll up ahead and so you exit and you do a U-turn or whatever, not realizing that like that was the last toll, or it was one of the last tolls.
All right, coming up, we get inside Bo Burnham and his little guest house.
Was his Netflix comedy special performative or authentic?
Can I interest you in everything all of the time?
And still to come, our discussion on A Quiet Place Part 2.
Who are we if we can't protect them? So you have mentioned to me 3 different films. One on this show, 2 other by text, which I have now seen all 3 of them. The first one was Bo Burnham's Inside, which was one of your picks, at least his little
well, I think I went
Instagram bit.
Yeah, I went out of my way to say like, it's dark. I'm not going to make that my pick.
Well, it's interesting you call it dark. It is. I feel like it's very on brand with Bo Burnham. I mean, his other ones were dark. I don't know, maybe it was darker. I mean, because, he's definitely, like, he breaks down in tears. But it captures the year of quarantine that was dark for everyone. So he's very raw about that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's rawness. You call it dark. I would probably call it raw. And maybe because I identify with the darkness, but you do too. I mean, I know you have dark.
Well, I mean, for me, dark does not equate to bad. It's just it's a caveat, because I know that a lot of people do, dark is not necessarily their thing. For me, I live in the darkness. I want something that's as black as my soul.
Right. I mean, I kind of thought of it was a masterpiece, not just for the bits, which were hilarious, like the Instagram song, but even some of the throwaway ones, like when he's doing the video game.
The video game live stream?
Yeah, where he's just live streaming, and the video game is him, walking around. Right. He's like, I guess I'll just cry. And he presses A. He just, that's all his character does.
It's like a closed room video game, and he can't figure out
open the door.
Yeah.
He just has to cry. But then the bit where he was doing a comment video.
The reaction video?
Just little stuff like that was hilarious. I just thought the whole thing was pretty masterful, and just a great document of our time.
I mean, it is, I think, the most encapsulated document of, or almost like a time capsule. But I have been thinking about it a lot, and I've been kind of going back and forth. I love Bo Burnham, and his Make Happy is something that I watch on a regular basis. Words. Go listen to that on Spotify. Rant is just hilarious. Art is Dead. They're great. I love all this stuff. But there's one thing that I keep going back and forth in my mind, and it's one of those things where I can't decide if I feel like there are two possibilities for what I'm about to describe, and I can't decide if either possibility makes me like it more or less. And here's what it is. I feel like, was this an honest thing of like watching his spiral? Was he documenting his own emotional spiral? That's one thing, right? And everything we saw, all of the breaking down, all of that was honest emotion. But then I think about, his stand-up, and especially, in Make Happy, he actually makes a joke about like, nothing in this is spontaneous. Everything is timed down to the second, down to the gesture. And it makes a little finger gun, and it makes a ping sound. And I'm like, okay, well then, so the alternative is that this was a stage play, right? And everything was performative. And then, when I was thinking about that, I was like, well, then that makes me feel a little dirty about like the emotion of like watching him cry and like be emotional. It's like, is he taking advantage? Is this, but then I think, okay, but what if he is trying to depict it? He's an actor. And so then that gives him license to do this. And it's almost, to me, it comes down to like, if it's the latter, which is that it was performative, then it only feels gross if he's presenting it as honest. If he's presenting it as like, this is a depiction of what we all experienced, then it's like, oh, okay, then I feel like, then I enjoy it again. And it feels so weird in my mind, this cognitive dissonance of like, if this, then I enjoy it. If it's not this, then I feel weird about it. You know what I mean? I know I just kind of went on a whole thing, but
no, I understand.
And again, I'm not coming down hard. I'm still like, this is one of those things. I don't know exactly where my brain is landing.
Well, and I think the reality of Inside, this particular piece of art, is a little bit of both. I definitely think there was true, the pain and the trauma and the depression of the experience of sort of being in lockdown definitely caused true, authentic moments that he captured, because they did for everybody. But he also is someone. It is true that he stopped doing live performances because he would have panic attacks on stage.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about that when he was touring for 8th Grade, his feature film. And he was basically like, I'm done doing live performances, because he would have legit panic attacks. So, and so it was true that after 5 years off of stage making the film, he was ready to get back into it. And then the pandemic happened. And so I feel like someone with his brain makeup would be inclined to sort of anxiety and even depression. So much of that felt authentic because it likely was. The one shot that you did wonder if it crossed over into performance was the one time where he actually started crying, and he cuts out of it really quick. And it's just a shot where he's like, guys, I am not doing well.
Right.
He's looking into the camera, and then he starts crying, and it cuts. That was the one shot where I didn't know if it was authentic. And either way, if it was true and raw or if it was performative, I don't know that it should have made the edit, because you're left with the question, is that real? Is he just acting? Versus like the little monologue where he's talking about suicide. It felt authentic because... And it largely wasn't performative. He wasn't like, oh, I want to kill myself. He was actually like, I don't want to kill myself. But, you know, I've had friends who've killed themselves, and it's not cool. Don't do it. It's not, you know, that little monologue. You could ask the same question. Oh, was that performative? Does he really wrestle with these ideas? Like, none of that really bothered me. The one shot where he cries was the one that felt, I don't know. And it probably shouldn't have made the edit because of that.
Yeah. I mean, that was the one that kind of tipped me over, and it was honestly the idea. And not sometimes, almost always, I am too meta removed from entertainment. And that's why I really love things that that break that in me. I'm always wondering what's the twist going to be, like all that kind of shit. And in this case, it was watching that, and the thought that immediately popped into my head was, how many takes did it take to get that?
Yeah.
And it was like, that kind of felt like, ooh, like imagining him like, no, that wasn't quite it. Let me redo that. And again, it's like, but if he was doing it because he was trying to represent something, because the reality is that, you know, I don't in any way mean to, like, not that Bo Burnham would ever hear this, but I don't mean to minimize his experience. I'm sure it was difficult, but he wasn't actually trapped in that room.
Right.
Right. And that room, like, isn't even his house. It is his
guest house,
you know. And so there was a certain amount of it that was like 100% performative, because he was not locked in that room.
Sure.
Like, he had this other stuff.
And it was a big punchline of, once he gets out, he just wants to get back in, and now he's locked out.
Yeah, because the outside is terrifying now. Or it's always been terrifying, and we just sort of, you know, rose-colored glasses viewed it that way. Anyway, all this is just sort of like the discussion and digging into it. And in no way sort of am I saying I didn't like it. There are just things that I guess I'm still like grappling with about how do I feel about it.
And it's a good thing to wrestle with, because I'll probably talk out of both sides of my mouth, where it's like, well, all that matters is the piece of art, like the final thing that he sculpted. And nothing like that is what he's presented. This film called Inside, and experience the film for its own sake, no matter how it was created. And the other side of my mouth would be, but it's impossible to completely extricate our own thinkings about the piece of art. When we watch it, we inevitably appreciate something more or less based on what we know about it. You inevitably appreciate something more with additional context. So, and maybe it should always be that way. There's always tension. There's always a wrestle. There's always, like, you see a painting where you're just like, this is dumb. I don't know what I'm supposed to get from it. But then you learn about the painting or the process or the artist.
Yeah, the brush stroke or the innovation
or everything is context. And you're just, all of a sudden, it's just like,
sometimes you learn something about it and it means more. Up now, a spoiler-filled conversation on John Krasinski's A Quiet Place Part 2.
And plenty of instances of Justin not being able to pronounce Krasinski.
Hey, thanks for hanging me out to dry. You could have just told me when we recorded it.
I could have, but I didn't want to. I was already envisioning being able to make fun of you about it. After that, our 2 picks, where Justin discovers his new favorite pastime. The other film I saw was Quiet Place 2, which you wanted to talk about. And you wanted to wait till after I'd seen it.
Yes.
What was your primary interest in talking about it?
Let's see. What did I want to talk about? Just the exploration of. I'm gonna use the word fatherhood, because I'm a father, but I think, you know, it can be sort of I don't want to be like gender biased that, all fathers have a certain role and mothers have a different role, but because, he was a father, and I am, that kind of the depiction of fatherhood in the first film, and then the contrasting fatherhood narrative in the second film, I thought was very interesting, especially, and I was curious for you to see it because of, stuff that we had talked about, you having a teenage daughter now, and, just there was a lot of tension between the girl and Lee Krasinski's character in the first film. And I think, there was I remember how explicit it was, but like that she felt like he hated her because of the death of their youngest child in the first film, which happens very early in the film, because she gives him a toy that makes noise, right? And this is, these are hunting animals that hunt by sound. And it's like a little airplane that makes, pew, pew, pew sounds. And she takes the batteries out, but, he's a little kid. He puts them right back in, and then he sets it off and he gets killed, right? And how hard that would be to like know that like one of your children was literally responsible for it, and not hold that against them. But then, he ends up like, he works very hard to like overcome that and reconnect with her. But, in the end, he dies before they can really reconcile. And that is like really, for me as a parent, and as a father, like hard to imagine like my kids doubting my love for them, and not ever being able to fully communicate that to them. So then in the second film, there was the introduction of Emmett, Cillian Murphy's character. And I love Cillian Murphy. Like, I'm sure he's done, projects that aren't good, but I've never seen one that I haven't liked that he's been in. But when they introduced the character, I was nervous. I was like, oh shit. Okay. I know how this is going to go. This is going to be, we're going to meet a curmudgeon-y old, sort of like survivalist guy, and he's going to say like, no, you can't stay here. Like, no. And then he's going to give in, and then he's going to turn into a love interest, and he's going to be like a surrogate father. And like, that's how it's going to go. And I think to John Krasinski's credit as the writer director, they did not go that route. It started there, but he never developed into a love interest. And I think that while he did evolve as a character, there were certain things about him that I think, he maintained his sense of self and who he was. And, the story of like of his loss, which contrasted to Lee's, sort of the end of Lee's arc in the first film, where he dies to save his kids. He sacrifices himself. Emmett lost both his children and his wife subsequently, like after the kids. And, in a sort of a global cataclysm like that, you can't fault him. It's not like, well, Lee did the right thing and Emmett didn't, because we don't know how they died. We don't know what happened. And it's not necessarily that Emmett was a coward. He wasn't able to protect his family. And that is something that is like a deep fear, I think, that a lot of parents have. But the way that he interacted with the kids and with Evelyn, the wife, she like shows the newborn baby, and I don't know, I just thought they did a really good job. And he has this like redemption arc. Not that he needed redemption, because it's not that he did anything wrong, but you could tell internally the character wanted redemption. And in the end, he makes a great sacrifice. He, puts himself in great danger for this, this young girl that he doesn't have anything to gain from it, really, right? It's not his daughter. And I don't know. I thought it was a very beautiful relationship. The fact that he was able to show her love without it being displaced paternal love. Like they didn't fall into any of those traps. And I really appreciated that. And I felt like it was emotional that the daughter, the girl, who is deaf, she ended up being very much the source of salvation, in what I thought was, kind of an interesting creative hook.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I really liked the film as well. A few things first, about what I thought it did as a sequel that was really sort of refreshing, where it didn't go for the big overblown sequel syndrome of just, 2xing everything. The creatures evolved. It's just this bigger thing. It is literally just a continuation of the first story. And to the point, like you said, an immediate continuation. I mean, it's the first one ends, Emily Blunt cocks the shotgun and you cut to black. This begins the moment that film cuts to black.
Gun still in her hand, like literally the next moment.
Literally. And it doesn't then jump in time. It is about the next several days.
Yeah.
And that seems obvious, and maybe it's more common. It invokes sort of the episodic nature of how we consume a lot of television content, but it's not really done in sequels, and it was done really well. And that simplicity, that sort of scale, the fact that it wasn't enlarging the scale of this story at all, it's just continuing it. I could see them pushing back on executives who'd be like, no, go bigger. And he's like, no. I just want to tell the story of the next few days as they continue to survive. And the creatures they wouldn't have time to evolve, but it's not like some new power that they have that they couldn't. There is one spoiler, sort of deficiency that they discover, which is they can't swim, and that becomes sort of a key plot point.
But that was also not really, in no way was that like a retcon, because they had never experienced them near water, up to that point.
Right. And the great twist, which I thought was really elegant, and it really did fill the world out, was that there was a contingency of people who are sort of living a normal life on an island. Because they can't swim, they were able to get to an island and sort of be protected. And they can basically talk freely on this island and live their life, however sort of small and isolated, because the monsters can't hear them from the island, or if they can, they can't swim. So that was an amazing little twist that did kind of expand the world of the film, but I thought in an elegant way. And it was a nice kind of shocker moment for our characters, who only knew world in sort of this very survivalist, live very quiet, sort of, the world that they've been living in for the last 460 days or whatever. So for the film to really just embrace the scope of the first film and just continue the story, I thought was actually a bold choice, and one that really worked for me, really paid off, because, and this goes back to your point, it keeps it about the characters and about the theme. I agree. The first one for me was very much about, you said fatherhood. I looked at it as parenthood, because I thought they were very much a strong unit, as a husband and wife. And it's really interesting talking about context and how we watch art. Emily Blunt and John Krasinski are married.
Yeah.
They are husband and wife in real life.
Which, I mean, imagine, a difficult job directing your spouse. Like, yeah, I need you to do that again.
And she says the line, "Who are we if we can't protect him?" So the first film is very much interested in the themes of parental protection. And the great horror films and thrillers sort of take a simple theme like that, and they explore it through, these sort of horrific storylines. And so the second one, I thought, did continue and show us something a little different thematically, which made it a better film, because it wasn't just treading on parental protection. It was passing on this idea of protection to the kids. Like the first one, John Krasinski is the provider protector, and he dies.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very man's man in the film.
Very man, right?
Farmer,
flannel,
yeah,
farmer beard. And the final shot of Emily Blunt cocking her shotgun, it was like, okay, now I am the alpha of this family. She was embracing her role.
Yeah, the new mantle.
That she willingly conceded. She was the nurturer. She was teaching the kids, homeschooling them. John Krasinski was out catching fish, and he dies. She steps into the role that is now hers, that is now vacant, and she leads it with strength and resilience. And so the final film is like, all right, the baton's carried to her. What I loved about the sequel, it was the baton was then passed to the kids. Mm-hmm. It became the kids who were the strong ones. And I love the arc of the boy, who halfway through, I was like, man, this poor kid is just sort of this wimp who's getting no good scenes because his role is to just be afraid. But he has this amazing payoff where he finally steps into the role of protector because he's got this newborn, brother or sister to protect. And it was a really emotional moment where he rises into his role to protector and doesn't back down and actually faces the monsters, and I thought that was really earned, and was
maybe the most like if we're all honest with ourselves, the most relatable sort of arc, that we are, we spend so much time being afraid, and then we hope that in the end we do sort of step up rather than just sort of being like bold and fearless from the get go.
Right. Because, the Millicent, the deaf girl, she's a very strong, bold character, and she doesn't really back down. And Emily Blunt, the mother, she's obviously fatigued and in pain, but she's just so resilient and she just presses on. And so, the boy who is afraid, and for him to kind of rise to it paid off. But it also, I thought, was a nice, elegant sort of evolution of the theme where it goes from parent to children, which it made it rich for me. I mean, the climax, story-wise, plot-wise, it hits a lot of the same beats as the first film, which I don't mind. I don't think you can do that in a third film. You can't keep hitting the same beats, so it's like you get to redo some of the climactic beats maybe once, and the reason it still worked for me is because all these other thematics were at play. The Cillian Murphy character being there at the end, the brother sort of rising to his place, and so it worked. I do think for a third one, you do have to do something a little different,
right? Because in this one, it was like, can these new characters live up to the mantle? Can they pull off the same thing? And I think you're right. Like that wouldn't track a third time.
What's really interesting is Jeff Nichols, who's an incredible filmmaker. So he did Take Shelter, he did Mud, he did Shotgun Stories, he did Midnight Special, and he did Loving. He's directing. I thought it was the third film, but then someone said no, it's a spinoff. He seems a perfect director to take this universe and to tell a story within it, whether it's a direct sequel or a spinoff, because his films, and especially films like Midnight Special and Take Shelter, they are firstly interested in family and family dynamics, marriage, parenting, but they're set within these great thriller genre stories and plots. Take Shelter, where this guy's seeing visions of sort of an apocalypse, and Midnight Special, where the boy says he can see kind of this alien dimension. And it just, it just feels like A Quiet Place is just so, it knows its tone as simple films about family that are then set within this sort of horror, alien monster, however you want to define these creatures, these plots. And it's really effective. Yeah, and I really liked it. I mean, I haven't seen a ton of 2021 releases because they've all kind of been scattered and I'm catching up with them. But, I don't know if it'll make my top 10 at the end of the year because of what's coming. But, so far it's definitely up there. It's it was just well executed, well made film.
Yeah, and I think like you said, it's about family, but the alien sort of cataclysm is almost secondary. It could be, it's an allegory for the pandemic, or not that it was obviously because A Quiet Place 2 was long before this, but even if it's whatever you want. Social media, the things that are like trying to destroy us, obviously I'm being, again, hyperbolic, but, that are like trying to destroy our families, and hurt the people that we love. And then like, how do we deal with that? I also thought, and I'm curious, I don't know if this was intentional or if this was just my own thing, but the sketches that Cillian Murphy had of his boys, right? They, you see him in the beginning and at first it felt like this is just to remind you that he had kids that are now gone, right? He's by himself. And I thought that was kind of but then like they are many and they continue. And then it's like, all right, well, if it's here more, I already know that he had kids, so now it must be trying to tell me something, and it's that, he has this deep, like, crushing pain, but then also, like, why show it to these other children? And for me, it was, like, is it implanting the idea, did my father love me the way that it seems that this Emmett character, especially for Reagan, the daughter, did he love me in this way that I didn't understand, the way that it seems like this man does? And yeah, I thought Emmett was just such a good character because he could have come in and been like the new alpha, right? Now I'm in charge and like super helpful and like I'm the new man of the house. But he wasn't. He was like I am a separate family. Like we are part of a group, of humans that are trying to survive. But like I'm not the new man of this. Like that's still Evelyn. And then to your point, sort of being passed down to the kids, which again is another thing. I just appreciated sort of the subversion of that. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that there were a handful of things that I thought that they did well. There was just a lot of times that it subverted expectations, but then also things that in the moment I was like, that's weird. Like the sort of the bear trap thing where the boy, I'm trying to remember all the characters' names, but now I can't remember his. He like very gruesomely gets his leg caught in a bear trap, which, after they like set off this homemade alarm to attract the monsters. And it was like, why in the hell? And then like, it really, for me, it kind of colored who this character Emmett was. And I was like, what the hell kind of character is this guy? And it was hard for me to like, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it wasn't until the marina when I realized, oh, this is why. Because he's seen this. The Abbotts have been sheltered from this like, kind of like dark turn that some of humanity has taken. And it wasn't until the marina that the film introduced that. Like he teased it and said, you don't know what it's become, but like, yeah, you also
people aren't worth saving.
Yeah. But then also this was coming from a guy who had a bear trap set. So like maybe he's the bad guy, but then it turns out like, oh, okay, this sort of is a motivation. And which at that point, that made me go down the route of like, these people, they set up the beacon. This is like a honeypot, or I don't know if that's the right thing. Like, they're essentially trying to lure people in so that they can, I don't know if they were cannibals or like what their deal was, but like great action sequence. I thought the marina was very well executed, both in terms of its necessity to the story, it's sort of the tension that it created, but then also just a really good action sequence. Yeah. Which then ultimately led to the climax where they go to the radio tower on the island. And it was interesting to see the island kind of act as a microcosm, like a secondary microcosm of what the Earth was when the monsters first came. Because when they got there, and again, if you're still listening and, it's not been spoiled, they get there because during the marina scene, they end up on a boat, and because they can't swim, they just kind of hang out on the boat, current washes it ashore of this other island, and they kind of go apeshit. And the people there are like not prepared because they have not had to deal with any predation. And so they just run amok. And, it was interesting that Cillian Murphy is like running and trying to warn people. And it's this like scene of mayhem and destruction, that you kind of expect, right? As these things are like tearing around and just barely missing him. The first thing that he does is he just grabs a child. There's like a child who's just dazed, and he just runs and then just grabs the child and runs into a house, puts him in a closet, and then like finger on his lips, gives him the little be quiet symbol, a sign, and closes the door. I thought was kind of an interesting sort of way to tie up part of his character anyway. So anyway, I do want to point out there were a couple things that I don't, this isn't in no way like I would not like reduce it a star or anything, but it's one of those things that I feel like you see in these kind of movies. And Rebecca actually pointed both of these out. And her first thing was like, there's this global cataclysm. Why are you reproducing? Like, no, it's not time for babies.
Well, I feel like that question is what the film is interested in exploring in the first one.
Yeah, like can and should family continue, or should we just wrap it up as a species?
Well, yeah, I like the fact that they had a baby, because it feels like the film is saying, despite the hardest, like, life should go on, life can
Jurassic
go on.
Park.
Like, this is exactly life will find a way, because it wasn't like, oh, this is week one of this alien invasion, let's have a baby. They were like a year and a half into it. So this was their new life.
Yeah.
And it was like, this had taken their son, but the promise of life and maybe family is that, we will go on, we can go on, we can still have joy and love. And so there is something to protect. Because if it's just like, well, let's just grow old and die out now and give the aliens this planet, that's a bleak sort of view.
Well, and it kind of, I feel like, leads to deeper existential questions of like, wait, what is our point on this planet?
Yeah.
Like, is our point, to just propagate the species or what? I mean, especially in their version of reality, where it's like, there is no more industry, there is no more leaving your mark on the world in any other way. Like, it has been so reduced. Like, even we have been rewound back kind of before hunter-gatherer, maybe.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. So, yeah, I mean, it was just an interesting observation, like a little outburst that she had when we were talking about it, which she, because she works in the birth world as a midwife, that is something that she's deeply familiar with. And she, in the same way that I have to hold back from not telling her who the killer is in those kind of movies, I find herself, or I noticed her biting her lip, and I see it when she's like, having pure oxygen in a little box with that baby's gonna go blind. It's like, those kind of sort of things where she has to hold them back. But the other thing that she pointed out, and this is something that I noticed, and just, it's one of those things I assumed, like, well, they did this because, like, sometimes you just need a plot device, you need a catalyst. And it's why in the first film, when they went to the drugstore, didn't they just take all the drugs? Why didn't they just clean it out? Why did you leave anything on the shelf? Like, yeah, you probably don't need ophthalmological, eye cream. You don't need like antibiotic eye cream right now, probably. But like, what happens if you get pink eye? Like, just fucking take it. Like, take everything.
Take everything you can carry, right? Because trips to that store are so fraught with risk.
Well, because they end up being a major catalyst in the second film. And it's like, yeah, like if she had done that, they would have had everything they needed. It wouldn't, there would have been a very important kind of plot point that would have been missed. But it's just one of those things, like,
that did occur to me.
In reality, and maybe this is just me, like, I would have been like, yep, bring a duffel bag because we are taking everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I did like how in the opening scene prequel, it showed that same pharmacy, and you really sort of see the moment these aliens land, and that was cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, all in all, I thought it was a very, in all of the sort of technical ways that we talked about, well executed sequel. I mean, just way, way better than I feel like sequels kind of have a right to be. But, also just in it, like, as a standalone film, not that you should watch it without seeing the first one, but like not calling it a sequel, just saying, how was this film? I also thought it was just really good.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people, it's mostly been widely praised. A lot of people criticize it for Krasinski having a heavy hand. I mean, in that climax, a very aggressive cross-cutting between several different scenes, but none of that bothered me. I feel like the first one, he established kind of a heavy hand with his directing. I don't mean not subtle. I just mean, camera actions, the way he edits, just ramping up tension, scare jumps, all of that. He created that tone in the first film because he knew he was making a fun, pulpy thriller, and he just continues it in the second one. So I didn't, a common criticism that I've heard, it didn't bother me. And I agree. I thought it was just a solid film, and definitely among better sequels because it didn't try to be a sequel with a capital S.
Yeah. And, I typically have a view, and it's something that we've talked about, and I think it's on our list of things I'd like to explore. And it's, that I feel like there is a great amount of enjoyment to be found in films that are, not necessarily critically praised if you take them in the context of what they are, right? Like, you can take an action film and enjoy it if you are not expecting to have like some sort of life lesson out of it. And in this case, if you're sort of taking it as what it was, what it is, which is a horror film, then I feel like it transcends its genre, as opposed to making this like, this is going to be, Boyhood or Room or something like that, and then being upset about the fact that it has horror elements in it, Mm-hmm. And so if you start with the context of what it is, very much selling itself as, which is an alien horror film, thriller, but then it just ends up with all of these much deeper, harder to capture elements in the genre. I would say that it is to top of the heap in the genre. I think it's rare that you can really pull those things off while maintaining a good horror thriller film.
Two picks. Let's do two picks.
You have a pick?
I do. I want to shout out another podcast that I had the pleasure of being a guest on a couple weeks ago. It's actually my third or fourth time talking to these guys. It's Tim and Jay Winterstein, who you met at the Newport Beach Film Festival back in 2016. Jay is a programmer there. He worked with Diona in Programming Fair, and Tim, his brother, programs shorts. But we connected at parties and had a lot in common, and we've just sort of stayed in touch over the years. Tim and Jay have a podcast called Saints in Cinema. Once a month, they'll talk about a film or films, and they tend to either be films with a slight spiritual perspective, or they apply a spiritual perspective for it. Tim happens to be a Lutheran pastor, but they invited me last week to be a guest talking about The Killing of Two Lovers, which, if you recall from my 2020 best of list, was one of my favorite films of the year, really championed. They loved the film, and they just invited me on just to have three people sort of talk about this very underseen small film. So we just spent an hour talking about the film, and it was a great conversation. And I just want to promote their podcasts and have people seek it out. saintsandcinema.com, Saints in Cinema, wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to my episode. They've been doing it for 2 years now.
Yeah, most importantly, go listen to more of Thomas's opinions.
Exactly. They've been going for 2 years, and great conversations with two just smart, thoughtful, considerate guys. So that's my pick, Saints in Cinema podcast.
Cool. We'll check it out. I'm always looking for another good podcast.
They've been listening to ours. We gave our podcast a good shout out when I was a guest, and you'll have to listen. They gave some good title ideas for us to finally name our podcast.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we've kind of dropped the ball on that for a while. So yeah, I'll listen to that, and we'll reconvene, and we'll nail something down on the next episode.
Great.
Thomas, for the people that don't know me, you like, I feel like I'm a fit guy, but would you call me like sporty? Like, am I a sports guy? Do I like follow teams? Do I know anything about the different sports?
I would call you sporty because you're a rock climber and you do martial arts. So you're definitely sporty. You are not a sports guy at all.
Okay. So not like the kind of the typical, like sporting kind of guy. Let me tell you about something that I've hated my entire life. Fishing. I have never had a good experience fishing. I've never caught a fish. I caught when I was a kid, I used to go with a friend. His family, we would go stay in the mountains of Georgia, and we would catch catfish by hand. We would trap them in a creek and, use stones to dam them in. And, but that was it. And then other than that, it's been like pier fishing where all I caught was skate, just hundreds of them. And it was like so terrible. I've always hated fishing. Well, my mother-in-law has always wanted to go fly fishing, and I've been enamored with the idea of fly fishing ever since I saw the film A River Runs Through It as a kid. And so I knew that nobody else in the family, was really into fishing. And so I thought this would be a fun birthday gift for her. I will hire a guide, and they will take us and teach us how to fly fish. And so we did that when we were in the mountains this past week, and it was maybe the most incredible experience that I've ever had. Now, this was not the fly fishing of the film. It had a name where it was like multicasting or something. Anybody who fly fishes would know, where you're like doing these massive like arcs of like the fly just touches the top of the water, right? And that's it. So that's not what this was. But it was just such a subtle, graceful, gentle kind of fishing. And I think the thing about it is that it's while it's very delicate and quiet and all this stuff, it's also constantly active. There is no bobber that you're throwing out in the water and just waiting, right? You are casting, you are drifting, like letting the line, and you're moving the rod to keep it at a consistent angle and a consistent speed. And then you get to the end of that. There's no reeling, right? Like the length of your line is fixed, and then you recast and you keep doing it. And like, if you read the creek and you think that that's a place that there's going to be a trout, you keep casting that same place a couple times. And it was the closest, I don't even know like what to say. It was beautiful and amazing. And it felt like I connected with the earth and myself. It was very meditative and all that stuff. There was a moment when like a deer came out into the creek and it looked like it was crossing the road, looked at me and was like kind of suspicious, came out anyway and was like standing in the creek. And then a moment later, it was drinking water. And then 2 little baby deer came out behind it and they were drinking water. And it was like, but one was a baby. One was, I don't know, some not really a baby. But anyway, it was kind of interesting that I was 10 meters away from them and they just went about their lives and then scampered off into the, back up the other bank and into the forest. And the last thing I wanted to say is that I just feel really lucky that I have the kind of relationship with my mother-in-law that we were able to go do this together. I know not everybody has great relationships with their in-laws, and I feel really lucky that I do. So it was a really special experience to do that with her. And, just to kind of have that familial love with my in-laws the way that I do. So I just feel lucky in general for all of it.
That's great. Good pick. The mother-in-law and the fly fishing excursion.
Yeah, do something with your in-laws.
Thanks for listening to episode 13. Please help us grow our audience by subscribing to this podcast wherever you listen. And rate us, review us, tell your friends about us. I've got a review right here from Evan Stern, NYC. An honest breath of fresh air.
No, that's it. That's what it says.
An honest breath of fresh air. While following a creative path and choosing to chase one's dreams is no doubt a brave and noble pursuit, discussing the challenges and struggles that accompany such a life has become seemingly taboo in today's society. To hear 2 humble, well, I don't know about that, articulate, that's debatable, talented men discuss matters of failure with such openness and candor is refreshing, reassuring, and ultimately inspiring. God, Evan, what a great writer. I highly recommend to anyone who is working towards a higher goal and look forward to more. Now, Evan actually is an old college buddy of mine, and he's got a pretty incredible podcast called Vanishing Postcards. So, Evan, thanks so much for the review. And heck, you review it and you got something to plug, we'll plug it here. Vanishing Postcards podcast. Go check it out. Love you, Evan.
If you want to stay connected to us throughout the month, you can follow our Instagram account at TwoFriendsPod.
And get in touch with us at twofriendswithapodcast.com. That's our website. And if we have any footnotes from today's episode or links, they will be there.
You want a picture of my fish for the Instagram?
Oh, yeah. No. That would go on the Instagram.
Okay, that's how Instagram works? That's for photos.
That's how Instagram works. So we've got photos. We'll post them on Instagram at TwoFriendsPod. And we'll have a picture of Justin and his mother-in-law fly fishing. Our company is badtheologypictures.com and on Instagram at badtheology.
We will be dropping episodes strictly every other week on a very firm and regimented basis.
It is summer, so it might be 3 weeks like this one for the episode to drop. So just bear with us as we get through the summer travels. Come on, people.
Hey, summer 3 weeks is like winter 2 weeks. That's what my grandma used to say. You know what else my grandma used to say? She used to always tell me, don't ever, ever sail an aluminum boat on a gallium lake. She was a weird one. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Love you.
I should have had his name like up in front of me because I kept forgetting. Is it Krasinski? Is it whose name is like his? What's the guy from Breaking Bad?
Cranston. Bryan Cranston.
Cranston. That's what it is. It's Bryan Cranston. And I was conflating those two last names, but I would get lost in the middle. Krasinski. I mean, I know they're not the same person.